Hello, folks. I'm Dr. Kaul, and we're back at it. We're talking about the ketogenic diet again, this time in relevance to World Diabetes Day. Of course, I've mentioned that World Diabetes Day this year, the calendar that we're focused on, is about women's health. And to that end, we're speaking about breast cancer and the overlaps between diabetes and breast cancer. So today we're joined by Parker Hyde, who works at the Ohio State University. And I'd like for him to begin with an introduction shortly. So, Parker, first let's just begin with a little introduction from you. If you could just tell us what your background is and your specialization.
Of course. So my name is Parker Hyde. I am currently a doctoral candidate here at Ohio State University. I did my undergraduate degree at Kennesaw State University, which is just north of Atlanta, in exercise physiology. Did my master's degree at Georgia Southern University, which is in Statesboro, Georgia, about an hour inland from Savannah, which is more people are familiar with. And that degree as well was in exercise physiology. And then my PhD here at Ohio State is going to be in exercise physiology as well. So I kind of came to the field in a really interesting way. My mother actually went back to college when I was in elementary school, and she got a degree in exercise science, exercise physiology.
Fantastic.
We actually have the same undergraduate degree from the same undergrad institution,
Exciting.
which is kind of neat. And so she would do like body composition testing on me all the time when I was a little kid. She's actually the one that taught me how to lift weights, and like I had a weight set in one of the spare rooms of our bedroom. So
Fantastic.
Came to the degree through all that and just kind of never stopped with it. So
that's a great way to start. Excellent. So we've all got some sort of history with diabetes, and I usually like to point out that just about everybody either knows somebody with diabetes or personally runs a risk of diabetes. Unfortunately, it's one of those conditions that touches more lives than we like to admit sometimes. And it isn't just lifestyle. I've tried to point this out a number of times. Although it's a very stigmatized condition, it is very complex and not fully understood as to why it happens to some people and why some people are protected. So my own reasons for being so, enthusiastic around diabetes and diabetes awareness are that there was a family history in our case. My grandmother was diabetic and my aunt. Both of them unfortunately passed away because of complications of diabetes. And that got me very interested in ensuring that people understood the condition. So I'd just like to know from you, because of course you work more on breast cancer, but there are overlaps between breast cancer and diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And we're learning about that more and more in clinical trials today. What is it that interests you in diabetes? Why were you interested in joining our efforts with World Diabetes Day?
Yeah, and so, I mean, I can't speak more to the everyone's affected by diabetes than there was a study just published, I think it was in October of 2015, by Andrew Mentie's group out of Canada, that showed that over 50% of the US population is now either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And those numbers are just ungodly astounding because when you think about it, the new normal in the United States is a diabetic or pre-diabetic phenotype. And so everyone's going to have some sort of connection to it. And when you look at the different complications of diabetes and when you look at everything that it affects, we'd be almost asinine to not be researching this at a higher level. So a lot of my interest in diabetes stems from my boss here at Ohio State, Dr. Jeff Volek, who's the world-leading expert on ketogenic diets and diabetes management. And I'm actually currently running a clinical trial that's funded by the National Dairy Council, where we're looking at the effects of different carbohydrate intakes with different saturated fatty acid intakes on some of these markers and complications of diabetes that tend to occur. So we're looking at cardiometabolic profiles of these individuals. We're looking at blood glucose responses to these different diets. We're doing a whole host of inflammatory markers that are associated with these changes in diet. And we're also looking at changes in metabolic rate on individuals that have prediabetes and what happens when they change their diet. So I'm definitely drawn to diabetes and this fact. And to be honest, there's no great treatment options out there right now for diabetes. When we look at insulin manufacturers and when we look at the treatments with insulin, all that tends to happen is we up the dose and tell the individuals, here's more drugs to handle your side effects. So I think that we need to have a more holistic approach to diabetes management than what's what's currently standard of care.
Absolutely. And the primary care is really what's lacking primarily in diabetes, and bringing about lifestyle changes that can prevent complications and possibly even reverse, in some cases, diabetes. So I guess this brings us to your clinical trial and the relevance of the ketogenic diet in not just diabetes, but also breast cancer. Maybe you can begin by saying where it is that breast cancer and diabetes meet. Where's the overlap there, and how's the keto diet relevant to these?
Yeah, and so breast cancer and diabetes link in several facets, and a big one is through the driving of insulin. So hyperinsulinemia has been tied numerous times with increased risk of breast cancer occurrence. And what insulin does is it serves as a growth factor, and it can actually increase anabolism of tumors and really cause some really potent downstream effects and almost tumorigenic effects. So it's something that needs to be managed very closely. And the same thing with glucose. So we've known since 1954 that the primary molecule that tumors use for energy is glucose. And that was done by a guy named Otto Warburg that actually had, I think this is the most interesting thing in the world, he had a personal letter written to him by Albert Einstein to say, we need you to return back to the scientific body, because he had actually left science to fight in World War II.
Really?
And so he had a personal letter addressed to him saying, hey, you're too good of a scientist, we need you to come back. And then his work went largely ignored for about 50 years until it's recently blown up again. And we've seen some recent research and recent meta-analyses that have shown that tumors almost exclusively and almost always exclusively rely on glucose and carbohydrate. So there's this massive intersection of glucose and insulin with breast cancer occurrence. And when we look at a lot of the hallmark receptors that are adjusted and manipulated in breast cancer, such as PI3 kinase or that whole pathway. You look at some of the HER2 amplifications, you look at a lot of these things that are all amplified in breast cancer that tie back to insulin management and glucose management. So there's this, I think there's too much there that's related to each other to not necessarily be causative, but that we shouldn't be studying in tandem.
Absolutely. And I think we could even add to this that there was the nurses study that showed that women with breast cancer tended to also have very high risk of diabetes, and usually it worsened their prognosis, which means it worsened their survival over time if they also had diabetes in addition to their breast cancer, even if they had recovered from breast cancer or in some ways were clear of it. I think another study showed that if you had a dietary or exercise intervention in women with breast cancer, associated with the weight loss and the lower fasting insulin levels, you also had better life outcomes or survival outcomes.
Yeah, and that's and to be honest, that's where a lot of these. So there's like the Nurses Health Study, the Women's Health Initiative. I can't remember the other one. It's NAS. It's the one that was kind of started all those studies. Nutrition Adjuvant Study.
That's one.
And what they really showed is they were attempting to show that a low-fat diet improved outcomes and decreased risk. And really what they found was that low-fat doesn't do much, but weight loss does everything. And so the women that were in the low-fat diet group lost significantly more weight than the other groups. Right. So all their findings were obfuscated, essentially.
That's fantastic. That's the best-case scenario when you actually go in with a hypothesis that it's possibly biased and gets completely thrown out the window when you realize, okay, there's a very striking result here that can't be ignored. And that's when you come to such topics as ketogenic diet, which really heavily relies on fat intake more so than carbohydrate intake in order to reset and reprogram the body's metabolism to improve a number of different functions. So why don't you go ahead and expand a little bit on the clinical trial that you have underway now at OSU?
So what we're currently doing and running with at Ohio State University is we're going to be implementing a ketogenic diet in women with stage 4 metastatic disease. So these are women that have recently been diagnosed, and we will be implementing this ultra carbohydrate restrictive high fat diet in these women in tandem with their standard of care chemotherapy. So for right now, we're working with exclusively women taking Taxol-based therapy. We're actually opening that up to include women that are undergoing Doxil, which is it's technically a liposomally delivered doxorubicin. So what that means is they've taken the chemotherapy drug and wrapped it in an envelope And what that does is it helps prolong the half-life and kind of the targeting ability of the drug. We've also opened it up to Xeloda. So women tend to prefer Xeloda and Doxil over taxane-based therapy because they don't have hair loss.
I see.
So they've been prescribing a lot more. So the trial that we're going to be doing is 20 women in a control group and 20 women in a nutrition intervention group following a ketogenic diet. The first 3 months of the ketogenic diet is going to be controlled feeding, which means we cook and prepare 100% of the calories that these individuals are going to be consuming. So we're doing this in a way to ensure that they're actually in nutritional ketosis. And that's going to be accompanied with daily finger sticks, testing capillary beta hydroxybutyrate concentration. And then the second 3 months of that 6-month trial, we're actually going to be coaching the individuals on how to maintain a ketogenic diet on their own and really coaching them through a ketogenic lifestyle. So rather than have nutrition provided, they're providing all the nutrition. And we'll continue with daily ketone monitoring as well. So our primary endpoints associated with that study is we're using a super advanced PET CT imaging. So this is a technology that is highly utilized across the world now for diagnosis of cancer in PET CT imaging, which stands for positron emission tomography. And essentially our strategy with this is we're able to get away with a much lower dose than is standard delivered because we have some of the best equipment in the world. So what we're going to actually do is infuse the isotope into these women and immediately start scanning. So we'll be able to watch the first, second, and third pass of blood flow across the tumor to see the exact metabolic rate of the tumor and see whether or not we're adjusting and affecting the tumor caloric expenditure, essentially, like how active it is. And then we'll pull the women off of the scanner and then put them back through, like 25, 30 minutes later, to go through a standard of care diagnostic image. So I'll actually be able to get a whole bunch of imaging that would normally not be possible because we have this advanced technology.
That's really neat.
And then we're also, on top of that, we're partnered with Dr. Jerry Crystal's group out of the University of British Columbia and at the British Columbia Cancer Research Agency. And we're doing a lot of immune function-based assays. So we're going to be quantifying and really analyzing the ability of the innate and adaptive immune system to respond to bacterial and viral challenges. And we're looking to see whether or not there's any improvements or decrements associated with the ketogenic diet in their innate and adaptive immune responses to the diet. And that's something that's never really ever been done in any ketogenic body of literature ever. So there's some work on inflammation. There's some very preliminary results on immune function and immune system work, but there's not ever been anything done to the same level as what we're currently executing.
So phenotyping and profiling as thoroughly as you guys are, really.
Exactly.
And also just to put it up for the lay audience in a sense, the ketogenic diet is a very specific diet. It's not, I think is what people would say inspired by another diet, the so-called cabbage diet.
Oh yeah, I've never heard of that.
I think Jeff Volek brought it up in one of his lectures because I think that's one of his mentors as well.
Interesting. No, it makes sense. Yeah, so I guess I probably should have started with all that. And I don't know how much you got into it with Dr. Hallberg.
Not a great deal, unfortunately, because we really spoke mostly about fats. But if you do want to go ahead and give us a little more background to what the ketogenic diet is, what the ketone bodies are.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So a ketogenic diet is by nature a ultra carbohydrate restrictive, moderate to adequate protein intake, and then a high fat diet. Most people tend to think of a ketogenic diet as a fad diet, and it couldn't be further from the truth. When you look at Paleolithic man, and when you look at evolutionary through the Homo sapien existence, and even before then, ketogenic diets have been used as a way to maintain fuel utilization in times of nutrition deprivation. So what they are is they provide an ability to rely on one's own fat stores in times of lacking in nutrition if you need it. So what they end up doing is they promote the production of a molecule several molecules, but one primary called beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is a ketone body. And there's another couple that are produced as well that are pure ketone bodies, acetoacetate and acetone. But the primary circulating ketone body is beta-hydroxybutyrate. And you'll frequently see that out there on the internet or in science as BHB or BOHB, and it all stands for beta-hydroxybutyrate. The diet was really, propelled back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a doctor that prescribed this diet to William Banting. William Banting actually wrote it up in a book and sold the book because it helped him lose a whole bunch of weight. Right. And that's why across South Africa they call it Banting, Australia they call it Banting. And it all tends to be a very similar version of the diet. And then the early 1900s, you see Stephenson, who was a famous Arctic explorer, actually spontaneously did this diet because he was going through the Arctic with a whole bunch of Inuits. And what he noticed is that they would take and consume the blubber off of animals up in the north, right, and toss the lean meats and scraps to their dogs.
Interesting.
And so he was kind of like shocked by it, and he was like, "This is crazy." And so first he did it, and a couple of weeks went by, and he was like, "Okay, I feel fantastic." Returned back to the States and ended up doing a study with McClellan and Dubois, where they put Stephenson and two of his fellow explorers, on an all-meat diet for 365 days. Right. And they chronicled it to see, can man be on an all-meat diet? And how it started was they gave them nothing but extreme lean cuts of beef and extreme lean cuts of meat, and it made the guys instantly sick. And they couldn't withstand ultra-lean meats only. They had to actually switch it and give them ribeyes, so really fatty cuts of meat, because the guys were actually having meat cravings because it's toxic to not have fat.
Sure.
And then the diet around that time was also being popularized for treatment of pediatric epilepsy and intractable, basically non-pharmacologically helped epilepsy, and saw really great results. And something happened, we don't really know what. All the research with ketogenic diets basically died. And then nothing really happened again until the early 1980s when Dr. Phinney published his kind of two landmark studies showing that exercise capabilities in both healthy and non-healthy individuals were completely conserved with the ketogenic diet. And after that time, it's kind of exploded again. And so we're now investigating ketogenic diets for treatment of cancer, treatment of diabetes, treatment or weight loss. There's male Wistar rats are being used, so they're looking at different versions of autism and across autism spectrum to see if they can treat that. They're using it to try to treat Alzheimer's, and all this is still preclinical models, so animal-based model, but there's been some very promising results in Alzheimer's, which they're calling type 3 diabetes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it kind of all makes a full circle around to this concept of fat metabolism instead of carbohydrate metabolism, forcing the body to utilize fats as more of a clean burning fuel.
Absolutely. In fact, this brings me back to what you said also with Sarah Hallberg. The one point Dr. Hallberg did make was that carbohydrates, and to some extent protein, can be insulinogenic, which means that they elicit an insulin response in the body, which fats as a macromolecule don't. And also from the energetics point of view, we know that fats are a far more efficient source of fuel for the body compared to carbohydrates. What you were saying earlier with the lean protein and meats being toxic for the body is also down to an inflammatory response that these macromolecules give out on just their very acute exposure. So that is definitely very interesting to get this whole lowdown. And I guess it's all tied down to insulin, which is what ties down breast cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and also weight loss.
Definitely. And it's also something that most people tend to forget is that ketone bodies are actually insulinergic in and of themselves. And it's one of the biggest reasons why type 2 diabetics cannot reach ketoacidosis with this ketogenic diet. We always like to say it's impossible to do. I'm sure that there's some freak occurrence with some drug interaction where it probably does, but more often than not, it is impossible to achieve because the body, high ketone concentrations will actually cause an insulin response. In type 2 diabetics, it's not that they're not able to produce insulin, it's just that they don't have a response to insulin.
Absolutely.
So it can actually knock down the production of ketones as well. So it's such it's like everything in life. Like it's such a fine line. It's a double-edged sword. Insulin it's not a demon, and it's too often demonized, I think. But it is at the same time, like it is the root of a lot of diseases.
It's a very powerful tool for a lot of regulations in the human body and physiology. Okay, well, that brings us to exogenous ketone bodies. So naturally, the body has its own capacity to produce ketones, which is what you're trying to do with your clinical trial through changing diet and also educating the individuals to take away the change in diet so that they can execute it for themselves. And really, it's all about playing with the carbohydrate levels and protein levels to make sure that your body is producing more ketone bodies for its energy requirements. But in terms of commercial aspects, there's so much known about exogenous ketones, and I'm curious to see, or at least hear from you, what does it mean to take up or drink that little ketone soup? Is it the same as a protein supplement? Will it have the same effect?
Yeah, and so we also need to kind of jump back to ketone physiology a bit. Essentially, historically, ketones have been viewed in this terrible light, and they've been painted in a very bad picture of that they're toxic downstream metabolites of fat metabolism. So I'm convinced I can actually go back and pull like undergrad textbooks that show that ketones are the most toxic molecules in the body.
Yeah.
What they are, and for those that are somewhat familiar with fat metabolism, as we go through beta oxidation, which is fat burning, we kind of start cleaving down these long carbon chains into 2 carbon acetyl-CoAs, and that's essentially what a ketone is a 4 carbon, somewhat short chain fatty acid, not really short chain fatty acid. It's like this weird little point where it's a 4 carbon molecule that has been combined and created from 2 carbon acetyl-CoAs. So what's neat is we've seen in the past 6 years now that ketone bodies themselves have the ability to go in and interact with DNA. So there's a paper published in Science that shows that ketones serve as potent histone deacetylase inhibitors. So what they can do is they can actually go in and allow for the uncoiling of DNA to occur, and specifically the genes that they tend to allow to be expressed is anti-inflammatory and genes associated with longevity.
Oh, fantastic. This I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. So Shimatsu in 2012, it's out of Eric Verdin's lab. And so they follow up that paper with a series of kind of like review papers that show the non-metabolic and actual signaling roles of ketone bodies, where ketones and beta hydroxybutyrate specifically actually has cell surface receptors. So it's no longer, it's more of a hormone than anything else. Like it has hormone-like effects. And then 2 years ago, there was a paper published in Nature that shows that ketone bodies themselves actually have the ability to knock down the NLRP3 inflammasome. And what's neat about these kind of basic science studies is that, yes, they're in petri dishes, well, forms of, they're in vitro work. They're at physiological levels of ketone concentration. So normally, a lot of times when we do in vitro work, we do stuff that is not physiologic levels. And these specific experiments were done with levels that are able to be obtained with nutritional ketosis. And follow that up with, there was 2 papers just published in Cell this year showing that a ketogenic diet, so something that specifically upregulates ketone concentration, is associated with significantly enhanced longevity in a couple of different strains of mice. And they're like, these studies are the most elaborate studies you've ever seen in your life. They're so incredible in what they're able to control. And they basically show that even though the mice were living longer on the ketogenic diets with high ketone concentrations, they were also doing so with a much higher functional status. So they had a better quality of life for longer. It wasn't like they were just sickly in a corner. Yeah, it wasn't like head down behavior the whole time. Like they were actually around and alert and functioning.
That is definitely incredible. And that ties in with a lot of feedback you hear from individuals who are trying the ketogenic diet as well. That seems to affect their alertness and the brain activity, because the ketone bodies are actually closely associated also with cognitive function to some extent, like you pointed out. But so that is definitely the truth about keto physiology. If we're going back to, again, this is in some ways busting myths of the fad of the ketone bodies being commercialized as a supplement, essentially, because ketosis has to be a process that your body is going to elicit for itself based on the sort of nutrition you feed it. It's a reprogramming of sorts. So if you try and give exogenous ketones, is that going to mean anything? Is that going to have an effect? Especially now that you've mentioned that keto bodies can have a hormone-like effect. Do you think it might still elicit some positive response?
Yeah, and so exogenous ketones are something that's kind of recently popped onto the market, and by recently I mean the past couple of years. And so there's a couple different versions of these ketone bodies. So there's a ketone ester that was developed by, I believe, Dr. Veach and his group. I could be mistaken on who actually developed that. But that's one that has been classically defined as tasting like jet fuel, and it's supposed to be somewhat hard to handle, GI-wise as well as taste-wise. And then there's been a kind of this new pop-up of ketone salts, and so it's beta-hydroxybutyrate that is bound to 4 different types of salts. So it's like sodium, magnesium, potassium. I can't remember. It might be I think it's calcium. I think it's because the thing comes with a really high calcium load. And what we've seen is that they do induce an acute state of ketosis, and they do cause increases in ketone concentrations. It's something on the order of I think you have to ingest 18 grams of it to get us a couple of millimolar bump. You don't see just massive sweeping changes, but the research is still extremely lacking. So we haven't seen a whole bunch of really well-controlled trials on the effect of ketones on anything we've discussed, on diabetes, on cancer, on anything. There's been a couple of preclinical models that have shown some positive effects of high ketone body concentrations in cancer. We're actually currently, our group is investigating kind of the safety tolerability of these ketone supplements in healthy individuals. So we've already completed testing, and we're actually in the process of publication, a trial where we gave acute doses of ketone supplementation to healthy individuals to see what happened to performance. So we did a cycling efficiency test and then an anaerobic power test after to see what the ketones did.
Was this in athletes or?
Yeah, so just healthy recreationally trained individuals. Can't comment on the findings right now because it's not a publication, but we've presented that they do increase ketogenic. So you do have an increase in ketone concentration. We're currently running that arm in low-carb individuals, ketogenic individuals right now, to see if there's a differential response between keto-adapted and non-keto-adapted and how they can handle ketones. So.
Okay. Well, I guess, Nikes, let's think about it this way. What's a practical application of the ketogenic diet for an individual? So we've heard of all the positive impacts it can have on cognition, on health, on reducing insulin resistance, potentially lowering the risk of diabetes even in individuals who don't have it. And for those who do have diabetes, it can improve chances of lowering risk of complications, maybe reverse diabetes. So how would you go about suggesting somebody executes a ketogenic diet in their day-to-day life? What are some good resources to look into? Where can they find a map, so to speak, for the diet changes? And something that I'd be very personally interested in, being a vegetarian, is there such a way as a ketogenic diet for vegetarians or vegans even?
Yeah, no, and that's something that Dr. Volek and Dr. Phinney have kind of they've specialized in throughout both their careers. So Dr. Volek and Dr. Phinney have a pair of books called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living and The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. So the one, everyone recognizes it by the green cover and the blue cover, and the green cover and the white cover. So the green cover book is one that's written more for clinicians, more for individuals that have a higher understanding of nutrition and metabolism. So it's a little bit more scientific jargon. And then the blue book, the one that's written for performance, is more aimed at athletes or the individual that has maybe less knowledge on advanced metabolism. And so those books are kind of the gold standard for how to start this diet. And they're very affordable. They're on Amazon for cheap. what they do is they go through and describe the entire process of ketosis and how to initiate, what to expect from ketosis. They give you diet examples, they give you recipes. There's testimonials in there. That is kind of like the penultimate resource for anyone that I know personally that begins to start a ketogenic diet. I always recommend them to those books first. I think the first step that really needs to happen with someone that's going through and trying to start a ketogenic diet is they need to educate themselves on what are macronutrients. So what is a carbohydrate, what is protein, and what is fat? I think it's something that we as nutrition researchers and metabolism researchers kind of take for granted a lot of times. But a lot of people don't understand what they're looking for in nutrition labels or what they're looking at online for what actually comprises a food stuff. So I think that's the very best first place to start is learning what are carbs, what is protein, what is fat. And that'll help you kind of down the road pick out what you can and can't eat. The second step is to go through your cupboards, go through your pantry, go through your fridge, and throw out absolutely everything that you might cheat with, anything that's higher carbohydrate, and go ahead and blanket get rid of everything. Because if it's in the house, you're going to be drawn to eat it. So any rices, breads, grains, fruits, corn, anything that is high carb that you learned about previously, you need to go ahead and toss. And then you can go ahead and start jumping into the diet. I personally am not the biggest fan of doing slow introductions. I know some individuals do, they slowly restrict carbohydrates and then slowly increase fat. I'm always a big fan of kind of cold turkey and jumping immediately into the diet and learning exactly what you need to be eating as you go with it. I will say that the number one thing that people mess up on the front end is suffering from fat phobia. So people are, from what I've seen in my experience, is that people tend to be fairly good at reducing carbohydrates. We've learned across the years not to eat certain things or what is a carbohydrate better than what we've learned about fat. And we've kind of been jaded by fat research. And it's really a tough thing because you have to be feeding yourself fat to get some of these satiety-based benefits from this.
And fats are seen as the bad guys pretty much everywhere in every industry. So that can be a real turn-off on the one hand, that if you're just restricting carbohydrates, you don't want to be low on energy all day.
Exactly.
You just want to meet your caloric limits.
Yeah, exactly. And people tend to think that they can go out and just crush a 16-ounce ribeye, not knowing that there's probably 85 grams of protein in there. It's they don't. We just tend to be, as a population, protein-centric and fat-phobic. So I think that once you can kind of adjust through that period and learn that it's okay to eat fat, that you do a lot better with the diet. And the first thing that I always recommend to anyone initiating the diet is they need to be tracking their nutrition through some sort of free product. So they can use MyFitnessPal, they can use Chronometer, they can use something to track their diet. And they need to at least start by weighing stuff out to kind of get an idea of what actual serving sizes are. And it becomes monotonous, and some people absolutely hate it, but it just works better because then you learn faster.
Sure.
The second thing is that you need to be testing blood ketone values. So something that we've been talking a lot about is what beta-hydroxybutyrate is. But we actually have a way to measure beta-hydroxybutyrate by a single finger stick, just like you would normally test with diabetes. You check for blood glucose on a daily basis. All it is it's a different strip that you put into the handheld glucometer, and you're able to test blood ketones in the exact same time that you're already testing your blood glucose. Yeah. So it's the same finger stick. You only have to stick yourself one time with the lancet, and it makes it so much better because you get direct visual feedback on whether or not you're doing the diet right or you're doing the diet wrong. And so, like we were talking earlier, I've been sick for the past 2 weeks, and so I dumbly thought it was okay to have a certain type of cough drop because they didn't have nutrition facts listed on it. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. and it dropped my ketones well below my ketogenic threshold, and I was metering at about 0.2, and it took me forever. Like, it took me a solid 3 days to figure out why I was metering so low. And I was like, why am I reading so low? Why? And then I figured out that it was the cough drops. And then I tested myself as soon, like the day after I got off of them, and I was well back in nutritional ketosis. So it gives you a much better aspect of what you can and can't be eating. So, and then for keto and vegetarians, it's really an interesting concept here. We haven't really run into it in any of our clinical trials that we've been running until the past, I think, 10 weeks. We have one individual in one of our studies that we're evaluating the effects of the ketogenic diet in kind of like warfighter type populations, so soldiers. And one of the soldiers, former soldiers that we're working with, is vegetarian. So we've been cooking a vegetarian ketogenic diet for him. And he's the type that is ovo-vegetarian, so he'll have eggs, and that makes it a lot easier. It's definitely not an impossible thing to do a ketogenic diet for vegetarians. You have to be cognizant of where your protein sources are coming from, because a lot of times I hear vegetarians or vegans talking about they get their protein from beans, or they get their protein from lentils. And when you look at kind of what the protein concentration is in a serving of beans compared to the carbohydrate in that
it completely offsets
yeah.
balance. Absolutely.
So you can't use beans as a ketogenic protein source. A lot of individuals follow the ovo vegetarian, where they would use eggs for their primary protein source. And you don't need just ample amounts of protein on a ketogenic diet. We generally recommend about 0.6 to 1 grams per kilogram of lean mass. So it's actually, it tends to be a little bit lower on protein than most diets are. So it doesn't take a whole bunch. Like myself, I usually take in about 110 grams of protein a day, and that's it. And that keeps me in a high amount of ketosis. So you think one egg has about 8 grams of protein in it if it's a large egg. And you can kind of do some quick back calculations, see how much protein you need off of that.
Sure.
You can also get protein from nuts. They have somewhat decent availability of protein. What have you played with that's high protein?
Right.
I don't know about tofu. I've never actually looked into it. I imagine it's like not.
There's a lot of soy content. I think there'd be a mix of carbohydrates and proteins there, unfortunately, as well. But so the labels become really important here to break down your macros, not ignore that you could be running into too many carbs together with your protein or your fat. Yeah. Right. In that case, let's do it this way. The vegetarian, I think, probably your best bet is to be a vegetarian. If you're not, then I think we'll have to look into resources that might be useful for these individuals. Yeah,
and you can use protein shakes.
What is that?
So if you're the type that's okay with using protein shakes, I'm a big supplement person. I did my master's degree was predominantly focused on sports supplementation. So the bioavailability of these. So the bioavailability of most protein shakes is very high, and they do a very good job with a lot of them nowadays. So you can always do that as well. Dairy products. I guess I didn't even think about cheese, right?
Cheese is a great source of protein and fat. The only thing is milk, on the other hand, wouldn't be that great on its own.
Right. Yeah.
Because carbohydrates are very high.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, cheese, again, is one of the bad guys that we're always told about in day-to-day diet, cheese and your pizza or whatever else. But it's actually a really good way of maintaining satiety whilst hopefully remaining in ketosis.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And there's actually been a lot of push. Again, I do breast cancer research, and there's been a lot of research recently that has shown that there's an inverse relationship between dietary cheese and dairy consumption and breast cancer risk.
Really? Well, that's fascinating. So they also say obviously that red wine is a good way of maintaining an antioxidant or rather a low oxidative stress state. So we're basically saying that a dinner of a cheese platter and a glass of wine might be a pretty good way of reducing certain conditions.
And more is always better.
Exactly.
So the more red wine, that's the way I do it.
The more the red wine, more the cheese naturally, which is the best kind of message you can have over a weekend anyway. Right, but I think that's a really good point. Just backtracking quickly to what you mentioned about measuring the ketone bodies, because ultimately it's not ketosis unless you actually have a certain value or a certain range of ketone bodies in your circulation, in your blood. And this is really the caveat that a lot of people miss, that just assuming that you're eating a high-fat diet or whatever you think you're regulating isn't necessarily ketosis. So we just spoke earlier, before our talk right now, about surrogate markers, and you mentioned that there aren't really any. That you can't really surrogate or have a secondary indication of whether or not the body's producing ketone bodies. But what is the best time to measure the ketone bodies that you mentioned in terms of these prick tests with single strips? Is it in the mornings? Is it after a meal? Is there a time that you need to watch out for measurements?
Yeah, and so what we've seen is that generally ketones can actually be a little bit lower in the morning, and then they can rise throughout the day. So almost always we recommend a fasting. You stick yourself up on fasting. So kind of when you wake up and you're doing your normal thing, just go ahead and grab your glucose and your ketone measures. So, but there's always like this weird kind of not flux that happens, but there's kind of like this weird phenomenon called the dawn phenomenon that occurs where immediately upon rising, well, immediately prior to waking up, you have this large pulse of cortisol, and cortisol actually causes a release of glucose in the blood, and you tend to see higher glucose values in the morning immediately upon waking. And glucose and ketones tend to be inversely related. Glucose and insulin are positively related, so you'd expect to see lower ketone in the morning. You can also do it, not long after a meal. The way that I generally test myself is I go through periods where I'll test my ketones in the morning all the time, and then I'll also go through periods where the only time I'm testing is after trying new foods. So if a new product comes out, or I see like a low carb tortilla, I'm like, hey, let's give that a shot. I'll actually test my blood sugar and blood ketones after eating that to see what effect that it had on my values.
Right, interesting. Very interesting. Okay, and the other thing is, how soon do you normally expect to see a change in the ketogenic diet? How long does somebody have to be on it for them to respond?
Yeah, and so every single person is different. To be honest, like there's some time. So if an individual's diabetic, we can't physically because we're not physicians, but they end up like halving the dose of insulin almost immediately. So the dosing of insulin gets dropped significantly within the first couple of days of adopting a ketogenic diet. So you're almost instantly off of insulin, and you expect to kind of see a broad sweep of changes that occur. So within the first couple of days, you'll probably dump a decent amount of weight, more than you're probably used to seeing, because every gram of glycogen that we hold, which is a storage form of carbohydrates, we actually hold 3 grams of water. So upon reduction of carbohydrate, this kind of like spontaneous reduction of carbohydrate, your body will start burning through glycogen really fast, and you find that you're peeing out a lot more water. And so on the front side of it, you lose a bunch of water weight. And people see numbers changing on scales and get excited, which is fantastic. And it's great positive feedback for individuals that want to lose weight. You can expect to see pretty sweeping changes in blood glucose profiles and cardiometabolic profiles in 3 to 4 weeks. The majority of research kind of exists in this 1 to 4 week paradigm, where we say keto adaptation takes 4 weeks. Truth is, we actually don't know there's no actual definition for keto adaptation. Right. So it's a term that Dr. Phinney has actually been coined with originating and creating this process of keto adaptation, but we don't actually have a hard definition for what it is. Right. And so we take the Dr. Volek group, who published a paper last year showing that there's no difference in glycogen metabolism between ultra endurance athletes that are keto adapted and non after they've been keto adapted for 18 months. Right. So it seems that there's like this massive continuum of positive benefits that occur with a ketogenic diet. So changes are like so sweeping and so varied across this continuum that we can't really point down to a specific time, but majority, like fat metabolism, is kind of optimized within a 4-week period. It's really potent stimulus that really functions very quick, and then you get added benefits after.
That's fantastic. I mean, anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks range sounds like a really interesting time span to be able to experiment for yourself and see, well, can I expect to have changes that I'm looking for specifically?
Exactly.
And this raised another interesting question in my mind, because you mentioned weight training earlier in the very beginning of our conversation. So I'm an amateur, but I'm trying these days to lift.
Yeah.
And I'm hitting a certain space where I keep finding that, I get to a certain point of a jump to a slightly higher weight, but then it takes a while to backtrack and really increase volume. And it's been slower now that I've gotten a little higher than my own body weight in deadlifts. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if there's some way I can optimize nutrition, because so far I can't optimize the timing of my workouts. When you're a working professional, there's only so many times you can pull off a workout. So you think, if I get my time in the evening, I'll do it then, morning, whenever.
Yeah.
So is there some way the ketogenic diet can also optimize and help recreational athletes or recreational activities of the form of lifting, or maybe long distance running, anybody who's into those kind of things, maybe running a marathon? Could the ketogenic diet support any of that?
Yeah, and so we have research to show that, especially on the ultra endurance or the endurance population, so those that aren't working in a super high percentage of their VO2 max or their heart rate max, they seem to derive benefits from a ketogenic diet. The primary reason for that is they don't have to always be providing an exogenous fuel source. So if you've ever talked to someone that runs a marathon, they are ungodly specific about how much they have to eat, when they have to eat it, what type of things they can eat. And what you see with individuals that go through a keto adaptation phase and then start running is that they don't have to have that same nutrition. They don't have to have onboard nutrition with them the whole time. They're not slurping down these vile things in their mouth that are like some weird aqueous mixture causing GI distress. And like, you don't get the runner's trots with the ketogenic diet. So there's definitely benefits in that regard. As far as for resistance training, there's been a couple of studies that have shown increased improved power to weight ratios. So there was a guy, Dr. Paoli, that showed in elite male rhythmic gymnastics that they actually improved kind of like their power to weight ratio. So absolute strength kind of went down a little bit, but relative to their body weight, it improved. So that accompanies the weight loss. We're currently running a study right now where we're testing this keto adaptation, and we're keto adapting individuals, these war fighters, and we're testing them at baseline, after 1 week of the diet, after 6 weeks of the diet, and then after 12 weeks of the diet. So we're really trying to capture to see what changes in the anaerobic side of it. So we've presented a couple of posters showing that there's sub-significant but high effect size improvements in VO2 max. So they're not statistically significant, but the Cohen's D and the effect size is like 0.9. So it's really, there's something there. We just have too small sample size. Right. And then, so we haven't published any of the anaerobic power, and we haven't really even started to analyze it. So we're still awaiting some of that. It would make sense to have performance decrements at the onset, and what we actually coach individuals through is that if they begin consuming a ketogenic diet, they need to expect to have about a 4-week delay. So their performance will be not as adequate, not up to full standards for about 4 weeks, while you kind of start to upregulate some of this fat burning capability. And you have to go through mitochondrial biogenesis, and you actually have high degrees of mitochondrial biogenesis that occur within the first couple of weeks, and that allows kind of this return to normalcy to then continue training. So
to put that in plain speak as well, in some ways, we find that individuals who undertake resistance training, one of the benefits people always say is that you oxidize fats more. And that's usually the exercise response anyway, that exercise boosts fatty acid oxidation as opposed to carbohydrate oxidation preferentially, which is also what the ketogenic diet does. And that's the beauty of it, that if you merge the two, in some ways you could really have certain very desirable results for you in terms of physiology, in terms of your body's functions, without really stressing your system too far, either with an extreme of a diet or an extreme of an exercise routine.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good midway of achieving a pretty balanced.
The metabolic pathways that are touched are virtually the same. So like exercise and this specific diet tend to amplify each other and serve very similar pathway-based goals.
That's fantastic. It's a great way of optimizing your lifestyle then. Great, then I think this has been very insightful. Can we have a concluding remark from you about World Diabetes Day, about the significance of lifestyle change in primary care around diabetes, and where do you see the ketogenic diet possibly changing the way diabetes is handled today?
Yeah, and so actually Dr. Volek used this term one day, or I guess this phrase, and I thought it was fantastic. I don't even know if you realize he said it, but he said to keep your carbs low and your hopes high.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, man, that's the most insightful thing I've ever heard in my life.
That's definitely a tagline.
So in terms of the need for a nutrition revolution, essentially, in diabetes, I mean, the time is now when we've got the new normal being a pre-diabetic diabetic phenotype, and we need to be addressing these comments now. And what we've been doing clearly hasn't been working as these numbers continue to climb. So it's time to step out of this chronic obsession with drug trials and trying to target specific things when we have a massive hammer of nutritional ketosis that basically everything starts looking like nails. Like we're going to start nailing down diabetes, and Verda is already doing this and trying to reverse diabetes in 100 million individuals by 2025. And we're doing this in cancer. They're trying to start doing this in Alzheimer's. So I think that the kind of the take home for all of this is that everything needs to be reevaluated, essentially. A lot of what we've done has been really good science, but we missed the mark somewhere along the way, and we need to go back and redo a whole bunch, because especially in ketogenic diets, we don't know how profound this effect is, because we're only comparing it to what we've seen in high carb.
Right.
What happens when we redo everything with a ketogenic diet now? What happens when we reevaluate drugs with individuals that are on a ketogenic diet?
Efficiencies could be a whole different story in this case, and it could potentially just completely be a paradigm shifting parameter in some ways for certain conditions, including cancer, where ketogenic diet is becoming an adjuvant or adjunct therapy of sorts. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Parker.
Thank you.
Really interesting. And for more information about your clinical trial, we'll have a web link.
Perfect.
That we can get more information about the ketogenic diet and this particular clinical trial in specific. Again, I think you already mentioned exactly what clinical trial encompasses, but individuals who would be eligible to this trial are basically people who are naive of any chemotherapies, who are in late-stage breast cancer. Women, I should specifically say, not.
Yeah. So there is men. Men do get diagnosed with breast cancer. I think that it's like 5%.
Right. But the study that you're focused on is definitely women with
recent
diagnosis.
Recent diagnosis, stage 4 metastatic disease.
Yeah.
Right now, we're only looking for individuals on taxane-based therapies. So that's paclitaxel is the most commonly known drug. We are opening that. We're waiting on IRB approval to include Doxil as well as Zolota as well, and we will in the future allow up to 3 courses of chemotherapy.
And this is in Columbus, Ohio, of course. So if you are getting your therapy here in Columbus at OSU, then it might be worthwhile checking out the clinical trial, because it could make a difference in your overall results potentially. So again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure talking. So that was a really informative session. I hope everybody took something away from it. More information about the clinical trials is going to be provided in the description box, and feel free to look into it. But also remember to join us during our event on the 18th of November in Columbus, Ohio, because you can definitely learn more about both this clinical trial and so many more things about how yoga can help reduce stress and therefore also the risk of diabetes, how certain therapies and certain diets can make an impact in preventing as well as controlling diabetes. And for any questions you might have, do raise them. This is really your platform. This is your opportunity to speak with experts, get their input, and to make sure that you're on the right track with the right resources. Because remember, this condition is only as good as your knowledge of treating it. And self-management really is the key here. So we'll speak again soon, but until then, stay fit, stay healthy.